Welcome to Unbiased and On the Fence. I'm Shane. Thank you guys so much for joining us for Paranormal Frequencies. And today's guest is Paul Davids. Paul Davids is an American independent filmmaker and writer, especially in the area of science fiction, often collaborating with his wife, Hollace. Davids has written and directed several films. He has also written episodes for the television series Transformers, as well as a spinoff of the Star Wars series with his wife, informally known as the Jedi Prince series. He also has a website with some wonderful artwork, and all of that is linked just below in the description box. So I want to welcome Paul Davids to the show. How's it going, Paul?
Good, Shane. Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Sherry wanted to have you on because of an interesting connection with Forrest Ackerman and Michael Jackson. Of course, she's had some Michael Jackson experiences. I'll let you take over, Sherry. You know more.
Well, what happened was whenever I started having all my Michael Jackson experiences, I was listening to Coast AM and I heard Paul on there. Mm-hmm. He was talking about his book, An Atheist in Heaven. And like, the synchronicities were so insane. Like he was having things happen like I was having happen with Michael Jackson. And let me tell you how sweet this guy is. I reached out to him to tell him my story, and we set up a time and he called me and talked to me for hours about what all had went on with me and everything. And I thought that was really neat because, he's like a big filmmaker. He did the movie Roswell in 1994 and Timothy Leary's Dead in 97, Starry Night in 99, the Sci-Fi Boys in 2006. And he has the Jesus in India, the movie. You want to tell him about that, Shane?
Yeah, because Saturday night when I was on with Eileen, I was like, well, I'd seen this documentary or movie years ago that was explaining how they set up really good evidence that Jesus, it looked like he went to India after the crucifixion and lived out his life there and was actually buried there. And I was explaining how he was buried east to west and all that in the movie. And I was just checking with Paul. I'm like, is that the same movie? And he's like, yeah. So what a synchronicity that I was just talking about his movie. So welcome, Paul. How's it going?
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. Yeah, Jesus in India was one of my most ambitious projects. I was in India for around 6 weeks on that, traveling 4,000 miles through India. It's based on a book called The King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India by Edward T. Martin. Mm-hmm. And Ed and I went to India together. I had an Indian co-producer on the show, Anil Armil. We had worked together on Starry Night. And when I got to India, I had either everyone was Hindu, but basically there was a Muslim who we traveled 4,000 miles across the country going to ancient Buddhist, Hindu. Also went to the Vatican on that movie and interviewed Monsignor Corrado Balducci, top exorcist at one point, and he was apostle and Prince Elaine Pagels, the famous Bible scholar, participated. It was an enormous project, and it was all based on the concept. Two concepts. The first concept is missing Jesus' years are unaccounted from the time that he's 12 to the time that he's 30, south of the River Jordan, and is baptized. He never discussed one's years. just saying that he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with man and God. That's all it has to say. And there have been legends going way back that during those years Jesus taken the Silk Road to India and had been Jagannath Temple of Hindus, very ancient temple in Puri, India, and had traveled to the birthplace of the Buddha and stayed with Hindus and Buddhists, and then made his way back to Judea to begin his ministry. So that was one of the areas of investigation. Was that true? Was there any evidence for it? A couple thousand years later, you talk about a cold case, but there was a lot to investigate. A lot of things about ancient documents that we were tracking down in a Buddhist monastery. And then the second part of the story was the speculation that some believe that Jesus had actually survived the crucifixion, and that that was the explanation for the disciples seeing him, the apostles seeing him after that he literally appeared before them, literally ate bread with them, literally walked with them on the way to Galilee. Very human things, not spirit type phenomena is described there. And that Paul, who was Saul, literally saw him on the road to Damascus, and that he ventured with his mother Mary back to India, specifically heading to Kashmir, where they believe that he lived out his life, and there's a tomb there that is very suspect and much investigated. One of the interesting things to me is that part of the legend is his mother Mary died along the way and is buried in Pakistan. There's not only a tomb for Mother Mary in Pakistan, but there's a town named after her that's a misspelling of her name. It's Murree, Pakistan, Murree. My co-author, Ed Martin, discovered that when he came across Murree beer when he was in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, way before the wars there. And he was told that beer is named after Mother Mary, and then there's a tomb for her there. So the movie Jesus in India, it's easy to find to get the DVD. And as a matter of fact, for those of you who have Amazon Prime, it is streamable, for free for Amazon Prime members. It's up there, along with a few of my other movies.
I'll definitely go back and revisit that one. I remember it stuck out in my mind all these years. It's probably been a decade since I watched it, but like I said, I just brought it up the other day, and it's amazing that.
It was one of the greatest adventures of my life doing it, going there, and particularly when we went to Kashmir, where that tomb is located, and it was so dangerous. I mean, the State Department had advised against Americans going there. There were soldiers with rifles on, every block or every couple of blocks, and
that's nerve-wracking, isn't it?
The tension between the Hindus and the Muslims there is absolutely fierce, and the tomb is in a Muslim district. So there were all kinds of problems presented to us, and as Americans, we tried to sort of hide out in some houseboats on Dal Lake, but we did attract attention, and we actually had a terrible misadventure even getting out of Kashmir. But that would take all night to tell that story. I think there's other of my projects you want to talk about too. There's so many. You said I'd done a couple of films. Well, it's 10 movies now, 10 feature-length films, most of which went to TV, most through NBC Universal. And then
I've got them up on the screen right now so people can see.
Yeah, with the Transformers, where my production work really started to take off. I was the production coordinator for all of the original Transformers cartoons, the half-hour episodes.
Oh, wow.
And that was actually...
I'd like to say I like the intro music.
Oh, yeah. More than meets the eye. Autobots wage the battle to destroy the evil forces of the Decepticons. I won't sing it, but I'll say it. Anyway, 79 episodes on the production, and 4 of the scripts I wrote. And then I got into writing Star Wars books for Lucasfilm, 6 of them, starting with The Glove of Darth Vader, These were illustrated, and Drew Struzan, who did the Star Wars posters, the Indiana Jones posters, he did the covers for our books. So those are really collector's items. You can still find the books. I mean, they're out of print, but I think you can still buy them new at reduced price. You just look around. But I'll just mention it. It's The Glove of Darth Vader, The Lost City of the Jedi, Zorba the Hutt's Revenge was number 3, Mission from Mount Yoda, number 4, Queen of the Empire was number 5. And number 6 we called Prophets of the Dark Side. Those books sold millions of copies and were translated into many languages, including Japanese, French, Hebrew. So that was just a great period of my life leading up to executive producing and co-writing the Showtime movie Roswell.
Yay.
You know, I have been so immersed in the UFO phenomena. It started with a daylight sighting I had with my children in 1987. And from that moment on, I knew these unusual craft were real. There wasn't a doubt in my mind after the personal sighting, watching it make maneuvers near us for a few minutes. And then I found out about the Roswell incident, and I got the rights to the book Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt had been writing at that time, called UFO Crash at Roswell. But it took years to get a green light to make the movie. You know, it was those were some of the most frustrating years of my life, because I felt a passion. I felt it was my mission to get that movie made, have people know that Roswell really happened, and that the evidence that it was extraterrestrial and completely covered up is enormous. That we've lived under a shroud of lies for, we're talking about some 70 years now.
So was the difficulty in like red tape with the government, or was there other problems?
No, not really. No, the real problem was we kept getting rejected by the networks we went to and the studios, until finally I hooked up with director Jeremy Kagan, terrific director. You can look up his credits. You know, the website imdb.com has everybody's credits who's worked in the business, and that's Internet Movie Database. You can find out almost anything there. What have people worked on? What have they done? Jeremy had made lots of movies, done some major TV episodes, and he wanted to direct Roswell. So we teamed up. He got us a deal at HBO. We thought we were going to make it there. They kept the script rewrite process going on for a year and a half, and then they decided not to make it. And this was like 6 years into my effort to get the movie made. I was suddenly back to square one. Fortunately, one of the producers connected with the project, Eileen Kahn Power, took it to Showtime, and it went up the ranks at Showtime, all the way to the top people, and then they decided that they would make it, and they gave us a very generous television budget. And we shot it in 1993. It came out in 1994, and I don't think I'm bragging to say it's been a sensation. I mean, it's been on TV so many times, and it is kind of the holy grail as a dramatic film for the Roswell incident and what happened, based on the testimony of the people that finally came forward and told the truth.
It's so cool. It's so cool. We're going to have to like set up another show with you and like go through all that, because I, of course, wanted to take you back to that time whenever you won that contest in the
Famous
back when
Monsters.
you were a little boy. Yeah.
Famous Monsters.
Can we do that?
Yeah, it's such a moving story, such an important part of my life. Forrest J. Ackerman is the name to remember. I called him Forry. Many people called him Forry or Uncle Forry. He was kind of the leader of the pack nationally when it came to science fiction. And I'm talking about it started in the late 1950s. They put out a magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland. It ran for around 200 issues with Forry as the editor. Other people are still publishing it. Philip Kim is keeping it alive now. But those issues that Fari did are very, very precious. I started reading it when I was in 5th grade, I think. And I built monsters. I took stills of monsters, special effects things with my friends. And then we didn't have video. There was no internet. So we had 8mm silent film. And we would make stop motion animated movies of dragons and dinosaurs and space adventures. And these came to the attention first of one of Washington's major newspapers at that time, Washington Evening Star, and they did a full page about me, my friend. I want you to remember Jeff. He was my close buddy from the time I was in 3rd grade. We did all that together, and when we were teenagers, we met Forrest J. Ackerman at the World Science Fiction Convention, Statler Hilton Hotel in Washington. And that, I think, was sort of the beginning that kind of shaped what became, my focus the rest of my life, which was a film that I really was going to do it. I was really going to go for it. And Fari showed great interest in what we did. We won with his magazine. We were among the winners of a special effects amateur filmmaking contest. And he published pictures that we were doing. Again, no internet. So you have to realize his magazine, with its Graveyard Examiner section, where fans would write in and they would tell what they were doing. And that was the only way a lot of us who were fans of science fiction and horror movies from across the country could communicate with each other through that magazine. So for a while, I thought maybe I was going to medical school. I completed all the pre-med courses, and then at the last minute decided, no, I was going to pursue filmmaking. I was one of the first 15 fellowship students accepted at the American Film Institute, their Center for Advanced Film Studies. It was magnificent. It was in Beverly Hills in a mansion. And suddenly I went from Princeton to having access to all these different top directors in Hollywood that were taking an interest in me and the other fellows and what we were doing and what we wanted to do. So it eventually became my career. Now, Fari, I was lifelong friends with him from that point on. Fari had a mansion, a very large house. He called it the Ackerman Mansion. It was filled with valuable memorabilia of the greatest science fiction movies, horror movies, fantasy movies. Every room of his house had posters, it had models, it had props, it had the actual monsters that had been built, it had lobby cards, it had photos. He was a scholar, and he was a repository for preserving all of those things. And an interesting thing, and he was the editor of that magazine, and so editing and dealing with text, and that was his focus. But it was interesting. Fari was an atheist. He didn't believe in anything really supernatural or paranormal. He just dismissed it, but he dealt with it as fiction. He came up with the term sci-fi.
He's the one that invented the
intersection in Los Angeles. Yeah. The intersection of Franklin and Vermont in Los Angeles. I myself and a couple of other close associates of Fari got the city of Los Angeles to name that intersection Forrest J. Ackerman Square. And there's nice, beautiful signs up there saying, he was a science fiction editor and he invented the term sci-fi. But again, Fari didn't believe in any life after. And did I? I didn't know, but I thought probably yes, because listen, I want to regress a minute. And I want to tell you, I worked on a show for F. Lee Bailey called Lie Detector. People around the country had a story to tell. Wire them up to a polygraph. We'd close if they were lying, or we'd announce it if they were telling the truth. Come on. Dorothy Allison from New Jersey, and she passed her lie detector test. I had brought her out to California for the show, and I had a lot of chance to talk to her and deal with the case we were talking about. She had helped police departments find missing bodies in murder cases and solve those cases. And she said she did it by psychic means, that she would be in contact with those who had been murdered, with the deceased, who would put pictures in her mind, images that would help her explain where their bodies could be found. And she got it right again and again and again. So, yeah, I was convinced all of a sudden, hey, there's something to this. A lot of phonies out there, a lot of wannabes, but there are no ones. I knew it then. But knowing with fear. And Fari said, he said, there's nothing afterwards. He said, when nothing more. He said, but in a convention in the sky, he said, maybe I'll drop you a line, let you know, you see. So he planted that, but he was kind of joking, half joking. He said, but, don't count on it. Well, I didn't count on it. But he died. He died in 2008, December 4. And 2 months later, a couple months later, we held a huge tribute for him at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. It was filled. There were a lot of very well-known and important speakers there. I had a lot of gratitude to be accepted as one of the speakers in the tribute for him. And that weekend, weird stuff started. Fari dropping a line. It started with him with two Canadian filmmakers who had made a film of his life that was shown at the tribute. They rapped on his crypt. They said, hey, Fari, we're in town. We're going to show our movie about you tonight. We miss you. Wish we could hear from you. And they heard from him within a half an hour. I can't tell you every detail. I will tell you that if you know what a CAPTCHA code is, it's when sometimes you're on the internet and they want to make sure you're not a robot. So they say, type these letters and numbers. Or a word comes up. So within a half an hour of typing, of rapping on his grave, the CAPTCHA code comes up for them of his name, Ackerman 000. And it was just incredibly, what are the chances of that? And then it all started for me a few days after that, when something happened to me that was just physically impossible. If you'd have asked me for all the years of my life leading up to that, could something like this really happen? I'd have said, come on. I said, no, it sounds like fantasy to me, but it happened. Something impossible happened to me. And that's what started everything that became my movie called The Life After Death Project. It was movie number 1, and then there was a sequel, The Life After Death Project. All of it happened because something in my thinking. Questions, please. You there?
Yeah, sorry, the connection did get bad for a split second there. I think you're back.
Oh, okay. Did you lose? Which part did you lose?
The Life After Death Project, and then what did you say right after that? Is that a book or?
The Life After Death Project is documentary film.
Okay.
And you can find the DVD at Amazon. It's in a 2 DVD set with Life After Death Project 2. So that was the first project to grow out of the weird stuff that happened. And later was my book, An Atheist in Heaven, which filled in more details about Fari. He was the atheist. I used heaven in the broadest sense. I mean, it meant he sure had the feeling that he was still present, because stuff was happening to me that related to him that just again and again and again seemed like it was a 1 in a million chance, or things that you wouldn't expect could happen. There's a phenomenon called apports that people in the paranormal research area talk about. It's where an object just appears completely unexpectedly. It might be an object that you owned once and had long ago lost, and then suddenly it's right on your bureau. How did it get there? Or something that you put it down in a certain place and no one had interfered with it. You were alone in the house and you wake up in the morning and it's gone. Where did it go? A lot of apports started happening to me, both related to Fari and also after the death of my mother. The thing about my film projects, Life After Death Project is very science oriented, because what happened to me had physical evidence I could take to scientists. Basically, Fari dropped me a line, which means I had a document that was clean and ordinary, printed out of my printer. I had looked it over. It was normal. The ink was dry. It was printed like 2 hours before what happened. And then I'm alone in the house, and I'm out of the room for a few minutes, and I come back, and the document has been physically changed. I say, drop me a line. Well, one of the lines of text now has 4 words strategically targeted, blacked out, and blacked out in 2 different levels of darkness. And whether it was ink or solvent or paint, I didn't know, but I did know that it was still moist. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't water dripping from a ceiling onto a document. This was precise. Someone had done this, but I was alone in the room, and I certainly did not do it. It was like a ghost did it. Okay, so this is the beginning of what I call the Twilight Zone episodes related to Fari, because it turned out you could interpret this easily as a message from Fari. Mm-hmm. And the things just kept happening and happening and happening. And then I do want to tell you, I went to the auction of the Fari memorabilia, his estate auction. And my wife had given me an absolute strict budget of the most that I could spend, because I really wanted to buy the paintings of him. I wanted to buy all of the binders and notebooks that charted his whole career. It just had everything, even his autograph collection, even his birth certificate. I wanted these things. And my budget was $2,400, and I got everything I had wanted at that auction for $2,350, $50 below my budget. And so I have all those things that belong to Fari. The paintings are in my house. I have his archives. I mean, a lot of his archives, but many of his archives were donated, I think, to Syracuse University. And then many collectors have different things, but I have a certain set of things that belong to him there in my house. And in my house, the weird stuff happened that I call the Twilight Zone stuff. One thing I want to tell you, the mask of Fari. There was a mask of him in his Ackerman mansion. They made a dummy of him. Mm-hmm. And the costume they put on the dummy was very similar to the clothes that he wore when he went to the first World Science Fiction Convention in New York in 1939. I think that was the year. Forgive me if I've got the date wrong, but there was that dummy, and there was a mask, a plastic mask that looked like Fari's smiling face with his thick glasses. Mm-hmm. And I got that mask at the estate auction, and I kept it on display in my home office. It is actually on top of the Roswell alien, the alien prop that was the living alien in our movie. I have in this showcase in my home office, and on top of that was the mask of Fari's face. One of the really strange things that I've never been able to get over that happened was the very morning I got a phone call from the Sci-Fi Channel saying that they were going to broadcast the Life After Death project. It was accepted. That very day, I went out for lunch. There was no one in my house while I'm gone. I come back, and the mask of Fari was no longer sitting on top of the alien case. It had moved across the room.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Took a lot of pictures. Can't explain it. And these things, when they happen, it's never just one incident. It's usually that within a 10-minute period, a couple of things happen to give you backup confirmation that something weird really is going on. And in this case, it was my computers. I have a computer that has 2 screens for video editing, and lots of folders with lots of files and so many hard drives. And the computers just shut themselves down when I saw the mask had moved. And I booted up again. And when I booted up again, now on the 2 different screens are open folders filled with things that relate to Forrest J. Ackerman. You say, I hadn't opened those folders. Why? It feels like contact from a spirit realm. After all the things that have happened, I am convinced. And I will say this, that in the Life After Death project, I researched it. I took the ink obliteration on my document. I took that document to a top chemist at Indiana University. We got a top chemist at College of New Jersey involved. They studied this, and they were not only so mystified by the ink and how it could have been there and its chemical composition that had anomalies to them that just made no sense, and they could not duplicate it, no matter how hard they tried. They thought that they would devote a day to this. They devoted 3 years to it as a project and could never duplicate it or solve it. And one of the scientists, John Allison, who's contributed a couple of chapters to our book called An Atheist in Heaven, he began to have weird things happen to him that were like communications from Fari, some of which were just absolutely caught on video as we were filming. Weird things happen with John Allison. And it kept going for him too, just like it had for me. So bottom line here is, this stuff is real. I'm not making anything up. There is another world that we can't see. There is some kind of survival of personality after death, at least for some people. Absolutely. Where the personality is still intact, because a lot of the stuff that came from Fari reflected his very unique, strange, and slightly warped sense of humor. And you could tell, oh, that's Fari. It's just what he would do. So, there you go. From that point in my life, I was like experiencing the Twilight Zone for real. And I wanted everybody to know this stuff is real. If it happens to you, just accept it. It is part of reality. They may call it paranormal, but it's normal.
Yeah.
Maybe we can't explain it, but it is part of what really exists. There's no question. Just like the same with UFOs. Okay, it's all real.
Exactly. Yep. I was wondering if you could tell about with the inkblot and how it had crossed out certain letters to spell someone's name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell about that? I love that part.
Yeah. Yep. So Fari, during the last 10 years of his life, had a caretaker and closest assistant who lived with him at the Ackerman mansion, and his name was Joe Moe, M-O-E, Hawaiian, wonderful fellow, very dear man, and he had always been devoted to Fari and Fari's research and his collection. So that's Joe Moe. He was one of the closest people to Fari, and Joe was, I would say, probably the main organizer of that huge tribute for Fari at the Egyptian Theater. Okay. So when the words get blocked out on my document, one of the things I wanted to know was, what was Fari's editing style when he was editing a manuscript? Did he just take a pencil and lightly write a line through a word that needed to come out? Or did he actually black out whole words strategically targeted, like, what happened to my document? Because if I could show that he edited like that, that would be another connection. So I thought, who am I going to contact on this? Who would have documents of his editing style? And I thought, well, it would be Joe Moe. Well, here's the thing. It hadn't dawned on me yet to make a connection here, but the words that were crossed out were spoke to Joe Amodi. Now, spoke to you could still slightly read. It wasn't completely opaque, but the name Joe Amodi was completely blacked out on the document. And I there is a Joe Amodi, a distributor in New York. I'd had exactly one conversation with him, and the reason it said spoke to Joe Amodi was the whole document was kind of a diary of phone calls and business meetings for tax purposes. That's all it was. So I thought I'll call up Joe Moe. I'll ask him, does he have any of these, these things that Fari edited? And one of the things I've also got to tell you is that Fari Ackerman, I talked about his strange warped sense of humor. He loved puns. He loved wordplay. He loved words within words and names within names. And he was always popping that at you. There was always a pun or a wordplay. He could get you to laugh really quickly by coming up with these things all the time. So it was part of who he was. So I called up Joe, and I wanted to tell him about this, but Joe interrupted me, and he said, Paul, I got to tell you something first. He said, I got to tell you. After the tribute, he said, I had a really strange experience a couple nights later where it was like more real than reality itself. He said it was like the kind of dream that you might have just before you wake up in the morning. It's like a lucid dream. It's super real. It seems like you're completely there. And in this experience, Fari Ackerman appeared to me. He came into my room and he said, seen any good Hollywood tributes lately, pal? Joe was overwhelmed in this, and he said, were you there? Did you see it? What did you think? And he said, Fari said, oh, it was fair. And that was a joke too, because Fari had always on the warpath of somebody his book that his collection was just fair. So, and then he said, the reason I didn't say eighth wonder of the world, because really we know it's seven wonders. The eighth wonder of the world in science fiction, it's reserved for King Kong. They called him the eighth wonder of the world. So Fari wouldn't have said that was the eighth wonder. He said it was the ninth wonder. And Joe said he said he must have woken up from this lucid reverie, where it was apparition of Fari. Mm-hmm. And everything was the same that his eyes are seeing except Fari's gun. He's not there. And then the words he said to me at that moment shocked me, because he said, Paul, it was just like Fari came and spoke to me after he died.
Oh
and
my God, it gave me chills.
I realized that the words crossed out on my document were spoke to Joe Amodi, and the name Mo is right there in the middle of Amodi, and Fari loved names inside of names.
Oh, wow.
So what was this blackout on my document all about? To me, Fari telling me that he spoke to Joe, okay? Mm-hmm. That he through this apparition, that he thanked Joe. He thanked him for this wonderful tribute after he died. And he's let me know, can't thank everybody personally, can't thank all of you one at a time, but I do want you to know I spoke to Joe, check with Joe. That's what it was like.
That is amazing.
And
did you ever find out if he would use sort of that blackout redaction sort of process?
Yes, he did. Absolutely. Wow. It took a bit of a search, because see, the first document that was sent to me that wasn't like that, I thought, oh no, but it turned out that editing was done by his publisher of Famous Monsters named James Warren. Another historic person in the world of sci-fi, let me mention James Warren. There's a book out now about James Warren, his biography, which is just a page turner. I recommend it to everyone. You can look that up. But later, I acquired documents from Fari that he had edited where the words were absolutely blacked out very neatly, to make a whole word, just like on my document. So, it all fit. And then as the research expanded, I got linked up with Gary Schwartz, psychology professor.
Shout out to Gary.
Gary, yes. He's University of Arizona at Tucson. He's been studying life after death for 20 years. He's been studying post-mortem contact with the other side using scientific means. He's been studying mediums by interviewing and working with dozens of them and determining who are the ones that really have the juice.
Right. He's the one that actually made the list of legitimate mediums, isn't it him?
Well, and I don't know if I think I told you this because you were so occupied with your contacts from Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Did I tell you, that Gary Schwartz's wife began having communications from Michael Jackson? Lots
no, you
of
didn't tell me that.
Lots of them. And she documented this in a book she wrote. I think it's maybe called Love Eternal or something like that. Her name is Rhonda Eklund Schwartz.
Oh, I'm gonna have to find her.
Yeah. But
really cool.
Well, here's the thing. Gary, through his scientific methods using computers and these very sensitive instruments to attempt to communicate with spirit, he sort of assembled a team of around 4 famous, well-known people, or there was one woman who'd written a lot of books about life after death. She had been a mentor to Gary, and then she died. So she was sort of on his team on the other side, and a couple other people. But Michael Jackson was one of the 4 that they kept trying to communicate with. And he didn't announce this for the longest time. He thought, people are I don't want people to think I'm a crackpot. So he reported those experiments using a fictitious name for Michael Jackson, but eventually he revealed that this is Michael Jackson we're talking about here. These things are happening. I actually took Gary to Michael Jackson's grave. It's a stone sort of sarcophagus in a mausoleum at the Forest Lawn, Glendale. Mortuary and cemetery, and that's where Forrest Ackerman is interred. People say, "Oh, he chose the Forest Lawn." What an egotist name. That's where he wanted to be.
I'm actually from there, and my brother's buried at Forest Lawn, and I thought that was a connection with Michael Jackson, but it's not. He's at the other one that's maybe in Lakewood or something. I mean.
Well, Forrest. I'm sorry. Michael Jackson is there in Glendale,
right?
Paramahansa Yogananda, his remains are there. He the great yogi from India, the founder of the Self-Realization Fellowship, one of the first to report on these otherworldly phenomena like apports. This is the first time I've heard of apport. Was in the book Autobiography of a Yogi. Very hard to believe that kind of thing until it happens to you. Listen, let me say this. A couple of other really weird things have happened in the last couple of years related to this that I haven't, they're not in any of my films. They're not in the book Atheist in Heaven because, they're recent. And I only discussed these things at a talk I recently gave for a group called ASCSI at their conference in Durham, North Carolina. It's an academy for spiritual and consciousness studies, and I told them about these things that happened. So I want to quickly tell you, when my mother died, pennies from heaven. That's an expression, pennies from heaven. There was a movie called Pennies from Heaven, and it a lot of people have the experience after a loved one dies that pennies show up like apports in weird ways again and again and again. often
I
in
don't mean to
ways
interrupt you, but
or
I just got to tell you, I hope my mom's listening in the other room because there was a handful of pennies on the cabinet just
yeah.
like 2 mornings ago, and she was asking me where it came from, and I was like, I have no idea, and I was like,
Oh
it was
wow.
Dad. That's Dad's
Yeah,
money.
very, very, very possibly.
He sends
Um,
that in
m-
feathers.
my mother had given to me a little pouch filled with pennies that my father had carried around with him when he was ill. He wanted to have money on him,
Oh,
and he had also toward the end of his life, and this was his money, this little pouch of pennies. And after my mother died, I opened it up and I saw she had a note saying these were pennies that your father, had, and the pennies started showing up, and for my sister too. And when we would together, it was so strange, like apports. In other words, you sitting beside a coffin and there's no pennies on it, and you turn and look in the other direction. When you look back, now there's a penny right there. Or with my sister, there would be times when bunches of pennies would show up where they hadn't been there before, or a penny seemed to just appear out of thin air and roll 20 feet across her hard floor. So weird things like that. But here's the weirdest. There's the weirdest. There's a photo I didn't pay much attention to of my parents on their engagement day, 1941, College, New York. This old black and white photo. It when it was scanned, I scanned it. I noticed that it seemed like the photo was it seemed like certain elements of it were doubled over, and I didn't look at it carefully. I just thought, oh, this one's no good, and I just kind of put it aside. And it was years later, after my mother died, that I looked at a printout of that photo as it had appeared in the scrapbook. And here's what I want you to tell. This is unbelievable. It's a 1941 photo. I was born in 1947. So 6 years before I'm born, and like 10 years before my sister is born, here's this 1941 photo of my parents. And it's weird because in the photo, my dad has like three arms. One of his arms is in two different positions. And he has like two noses, and he's wearing three ties. It's like, the photo is stuttering. And my mother's arm, can you hear me? Did something
yes,
just
Yeah,
happen?
sir.
so it's almost like a double or triple exposure where it kind of just maybe the film got caught is probably what you thought it was
At the time, that's what
right.
I thought. And by the way, I just heard an echo of my voice, like a double over. Did you hear that? Or was it just in my system here?
Oh, it's on your end. I didn't hear it.
My end.
That's
Okay.
funny though. That's
As I
probably
was saying
Ackerman
that.
now.
So here's the thing, that between my father's head and my mother's head, there's a little part of this photo right there that has an image of myself as a boy of around 7 and my sister as a little girl of around 3. And we
Wow.
recognize our faces from childhood there.
Oh my
There
gosh.
is also a ghost-like image of a woman with blonde hair looming behind all of this. And we've never been able to identify who that woman is in the photo. She appears in two different parts of the photo. What I'm telling you is that the photo was taken years before I was born, and my picture is in it as a child, and so is my sister's.
Wow. That's
I,
so cool.
it can't be explained. So there's that, and then as our hour begins to draw to a close, I want to tell you the other thing. Remember, I told you about Jeff Tinsley. I said, remember that name. He was my buddy from the time I was in 3rd grade, my best friend. And Jeff and I loved the science fiction movies together. We would go Saturday afternoons. We'd see all the double features. And his father was the one that took the two of us downtown to meet Forrest Ackerman when Forrest came to Washington, D.C. So his father was responsible for that. And Jeff died I bet a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. He had a brain tumor. I want to tell you that I went to Hollywood with my photography interests and the movie interests after college. Jeff became a professional photographer who got a job at the Smithsonian Institute of American History, Smithsonian Museum of American History. He was top photographer there. He would do these big murals, and he was the one they chose every year to be on the dais with the president at the inauguration, taking the closest photos of the newly sworn in president being sworn in every 4 years. It was Jeff who was up there. That was, a big part of his career. So he died. I missed him tremendously. We had been absolutely the closest of buddies from around third grade to, say, ninth grade. We're together all the time. And doing our special effects, our monsters, our science fiction, all these things we loved. And model trains, we loved that too. So I miss Jeff. And Jeff had made a scrapbook of, from the time he was little, cutting out the large ads in the newspapers of all our favorite movies. He put them all in the scrapbook. And we treasured it. Because, you can't find these ads anywhere anymore in their original newspaper form. But he had, dozens and dozens of them. And a couple years before he died, he made me a gift of that wonderful scrapbook. I treasured it. And he wrote a nice inscription in it. And one of the movies in there that we loved was Zorro. And why did we love that? Well, we used to play Zorro when we were kids. Jeff had a sword, plastic sword. He had the mask. He had cape. And I would have a plastic sword. We do sword fighting. So Jeff was always Zorro. Okay. Mm-hmm. So here's what happened. My high school reunion was coming up. I was going to go back to Maryland for that, Walter Johnson High School. And I was missing Jeff, and I took the scrapbook down from the bookshelf, and I shared it with my wife. I was going through it page by page, and I get to Zorro, and I said, that has special meaning for me and Jeff, because that's what we used to play. And then as I was putting it back on the bookshelf, I spontaneously just spoke out to Jeff, and I said, Jeff, I don't know where you are now. I know you must be somewhere. I just can't believe you don't exist anymore. And I miss you so much. And I wish you were going to be at our reunion. You were there a couple years ago. It's not going to be the same without you there. I just wish I could hear from you. Mm-hmm. And then I put the scrapbook away. Now, here's the punchline. When I woke up in the morning, I went down to my office. And I thought I needed to go to the bank because I thought I was low on cash. So I took out my wallet and I opened it up and I looked. And right at the top is a $20 bill that has the word Zorro written on it. Do you understand? Zorro.
And letting you know that he's there.
The $20 bill has the White House on it. And Zorro was written right next to the White House. And Jeff was the one that took all the photographs for the government of the presidents at their inauguration. It was mind-blowing to me. But it didn't end there, because I looked at the handwriting and I said, God, I wish I had a sample of his handwriting. Because these R's in Zorro are weird. The first R looks like a real R. But the second R looks like it's very hastily written, and it looks more like a V than an R. If you were just looking at that R alone, you'd say, no, it's a V. But it's RR. The second one looks like a V. Right. So I checked his inscription to me in the scrapbook, and everything he wrote there was all capital letters. Didn't help me. But I had taken photos at the memorial to him at the Smithsonian Museum, where they projected on the screen a lot of things throughout his life. And there was one thing from childhood. It was when he was in the 7th grade, a picture of him, class photo, and it said, all about me. And it said that he was 12 years old, and it printed there, it said, my favorite things. And he wrote girls, and then he wrote horror movies. and
Oh, the
there was
double
a double
R's.
R. And I looked at that double R, and it was exactly like the double R in Zorro. The
Oh my
second R.
God, I'm filled with chills right now. That's
Second
awesome.
R looked like, yeah. Now the Fari Ackerman connection there, it's like all family that transcends this lifetime and goes beyond death, because it
Yeah.
was Jeff's father that took us to meet Fari in the first place, you see.
Oh wow.
And it just proves to me, now, you know, I don't know what a skeptic could say. They could say, well, there was 1 chance in 2 trillion that somebody wrote Zorro on something and it happened to be in your wallet that morning. Could happen, right? Could happen with the
I
double
don't
R's,
know.
right? But remember how I said these things almost never happen alone? They
Mm-hmm.
usually come in pairs or
Right.
more. All right. So right after I discovered Zorro on the $20 bill, I plug in my phone to download my photos, my Mac. And what the Mac always does is it isolates the new photos. And then it asks you, do you want to download them all? Or do you want to check off the ones that you want to download?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I looked at it. There were like 300 some new photos. And I looked at the thumbnails, and they were all new photos except for the first two. Somehow, the computer stuck a photo of Jeff Tinsley with his father as the first new photo, and the second new photo, a photo of Jeff's father. Both photos I had taken many, many years ago. They weren't new photos.
Wow.
What were they doing there? And they're there moments after I see that Zorro is written on the $20 bill.
I
So
think they have to do it like that, though, don't they? They have to give you a few at a time because it's just, what do they call it? Cognitive dissonance, where you just can't believe
you
it's
want to
happening.
deny it. You're
Yeah.
looking for any as you can to deny it, but if they double up on you, it's yeah.
All right. It's like a confirmation of what you just saw. So it's a really comforting thing, though. I mean, here's somebody that a really good friend you cherish, but he's not really gone forever. In fact, once you pass away, you'll be wherever he is and reunited. So, I mean, that's a comforting.
You certainly get that feeling from these experiences. And these were people, and so include my mom in this. There, we got 3 people: my mom, Jeff Tinsley, Fari. People, obviously, I was really, really, really close to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's when it's most likely to happen. Now, if you're a psychic like Dorothy Allison and can talk to a deceased murder victim and find out where their body is, I mean, she never met those victims, but she would take an article of their clothing and touch it and feel it to sort of put herself in tune and harmony with, who they were. It's something they wore, and then they would come through to her. So where are they coming through from? You see, we don't know that. Can't know that. The world is not set up for us to answer all these questions, but it is telling us that this is real, and that the debunkers, who are just total closed-minded skeptics, they can't open their minds to see it, sometimes even when these things happen to them.
Oh, yeah.
Because it happened to skeptic Michael Shermer, who's president or head of the Skeptic Society. It happened to him, and yet he couldn't make the leap to say, it's related to spirit reaching out to me. But to me, my reality is, this is spirit. It's real, and be attentive. Look out for those things, because if I had just thrown away that weird photo, never known that my sister and I were embedded in it, might never have noticed the ink blot. If I hadn't been paying attention, I would have just said, "What's this?" and thrown it away.
Yeah.
So you got to be attentive.
So do you think these things happen more when you were focused on these individuals, like thinking about them? Because it sounded like the scrapbook incident, you were kind of going through these old memories, and maybe that's like calling them up, like.
Yeah, and it was right after Fari died, and I had been a speaker at his tribute, so it was moments, very poignant, touching moments where you just absolutely feel that person within you that you knew so well and you cared about.
Right.
And you feel pangs for their loss. And yet, this tells me that I'm being told they're not really lost.
Mm-hmm.
They've changed form, like a butterfly from, emerging from a caterpillar cocoon.
Right.
They've changed form, but they're still there, and so is their personality, and so are their memories. So I'm not saying this is the case with everybody. And what happens to them after a while? Do they reincarnate? I've studied a lot about reincarnation, and evidence for it is of cases. Who knows whether it's everybody, but there's some evidence that is very, very compelling.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
scientifically.
Yeah, we actually have somebody on that their kid had these memories of a previous life that was beyond beyond explaining it. You know what I mean? Because they were so young.
Yeah, it's
I
absolutely.
have to say something really quick, and I mean, oh God, I hate to even do this because I really don't have any kind of like skills at this or anything, but I too, and I think it was because of my intense interest in you and your story. But I have to say real quick that all of y'all listening, you have to watch the Life After Death Project and and read the book Atheist in Heaven. It's so amazing. But what's going on for me right now is I've had some communication with Forry, and I feel like I just got to say this, and you just tell me if it doesn't make any sense to you, that's fine. But I keep feeling like he's taking a bunch of papers and like mixing them up on the bed over and over, like 30 times. I've seen this since we've been talking. And then I felt like Michael Jackson mixed the papers up on the bed, and I was kind of, I was just sitting here all relaxed and stuff. And so he like pushed one really hard, like toward me to where he was like, just tell him. So I have to know if that means anything to you, and probably not, and maybe it will later. I really don't know. I just don't know why I've seen that so much in my mind's eye.
Well, I will tell you that when I was making the Life After Death project and working with scientist, chemist John Allison, there was an unexplained incident where he put a bunch of papers that he was going to take to the lab. He put them on a chair and tucked them slightly under his briefcase. And then he was out of the room for just a few minutes washing up, getting ready to go to the lab. And he came downstairs, and the papers were now scattered all over the floor, no longer where he had calmly. Yeah. And he reenacted it for me. I filmed that, and he showed me. He put a little pile of pages together, and he said, is it possible that I accidentally put them down close to the edge of the chair and they just fell? So he put a little stack there, and he pokes it a little bit, makes it go to the edge until it falls, and the papers fall down, and they scatter just a couple inches away from each other. But what happened with him was the papers were really widely scattered. Now here's the other thing, and this is in the Life After Death project.
Was that in that movie?
Yeah.
Because I don't remember.
That was in the Life After Death project.
That's
Alice.
What it was about. I'm just saying that's what I kept seeing.
The other thing was a tenant at the Ackerman mansion after Forrest. He had a tenant there who was a musician, and she would practice her singing at night, and she would put her music papers on a music stand. And
okay, wait, this is the one, because I feel like, oh my gosh, that's so weird. I feel like they're like, yeah, this one.
Oh, and the music stand. That's why Michael Jackson's part of it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and her music stand was right where his office used to be in the Ackerman mansion, and she would step away to get a Coke or go to the bathroom, and she'd come back, and her music papers are scattered all over the floor again, and they didn't just fall; they're scattered.
Right.
So it's been a repeating thing, and in that case, it happened right near Fari's original office. So all kinds of phenomena that seem really strange to us, but they're clues, they're communications, I'm sure. There you go. So
Absolutely.
listen, let me mention, because I know we're about to wrap up. Let me tell about a few of my other movies, because it'd be nice if people look for them and they can go to my websites.
Mhm.
Paul Davids, then a little hyphen, and then the word artist.com. I'm a painter. You'll see a couple hundred of my paintings there. And it
Wow.
also has some about my books and movies and the stage play that was made from my movie Starry Night. But I want to mention that my movie, The Sci-Fi Boys, is a big success. And it was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was on TV all around the world from Universal. And it was about Fari again, and Fari's influence through famous monsters on lots of people who became top professionals in making science fiction movies, special effects movies, in the future. Including Lucas and Spielberg and John Landis, Dennis Muren, who's won 10 Academy Awards at ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, and Rick Baker, who's won about 10 Academy Awards for special makeup effects. And Rick Baker started out as a kid being written up in famous monsters. And Fari would write, here's an article about Rick Baker, Monster Maker. And that stuck, his whole career. So my movie, The Sci-Fi Boys, has Peter Jackson, who directed The Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, and The New King Kong, and many other movies. Peter Jackson is the host, taking us through sweeping history of special effects in movies from the very earliest primitive black and white days up to the kind of effects that we have today. So look for The Sci-Fi Boys, look for The Life After Death Project, look for Jesus in India, look for my latest film, which is Marilyn Monroe Declassified. That one is on Amazon Prime. Another of my movies I want to mention, called Before We Say Goodbye, has a Hispanic American cast and deals with a Catholic, a miracle revered by Hispanic American Catholics called the Virgin of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Marilyn Hughes loves that.
Yeah. So that movie is called Before We Say Goodbye. It's again on DVD. And let's see, there was Starry Night. It's a really entertaining movie. I wrote the story and directed it. It's based on the premise: what if artist Vincent van Gogh, who thought he was a dismal failure in his lifetime, only sold one painting, what if he could come back today and see that he became one of the most famous painters who ever lived, and his paintings today are worth like $4 billion. So Starry Night, that song Starry Night by Don McLean, Starry Night, Vincent is the name of the song. It's about Vincent van Gogh, and Starry Night is my film about that premise, which if Vincent could return, what would happen? Would people believe who he was? What would happen?
He would freak out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. What if he wanted to his paintings now? What if he got a lawyer and tried to collect?
Right.
On that, it has the part. Then there's The Artist and the Shaman, which is a bit about me as a painter working with a shaman. So this whole variety of things. Oh, and my latest book, Blowing America's Mind, which is a true story of Princeton, CIA, mind control, LSD, and Zen. That book, Blowing America's Mind, it grew out of my experiences at the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute as a subject in LSD and hypnosis experiments back when I was at Princeton. Absolutely fascinating book. My co-author and I wrote it as those experiments happened to us, telling the whole story without us knowing until 10 years later that the research was funded by the CIA and it was part of MK Ultra.
You're kidding me. Oh my God.
I'm not kidding you. So look for the book Blowing America's Mind. I've just been a fountain of creative projects my whole life, and it continues.
Well, I got one for you. I don't know. Have you heard of the Mandela Effect by any chance?
Mandela
The Mandela,
Mandela.
like Nelson Mandela effect.
Oh, well, I know who Nelson Mandela is, but I don't know the phenomenon. No.
Oh, you're gonna love
I
it. So
think
you
you're
can,
right to relate it to the mandala, but go
yeah.
ahead.
So so basically, if you remember a movie line like, Luke, I am your father, it's no longer that way. It says, no, I'm your father. And C3PO now has a silver calf. And there's just all this stuff that, apparently, like, do you remember how many people were in the JFK car when the assassination happened?
I think it was four in his car.
Right. Now you look, and
Oh,
the
and then there
Zapruder
was
film is color. Not the
the
Secret Service
driver.
in the
Too.
back,
There was
but
five. No, there was the driver. There was Governor Connolly, I think Connolly's wife, and then there was Jackie Kennedy and John F. Kennedy. Do I have it right?
so now you've got a dual memory. That's what a lot of us will experience. So, like originally, it was Connolly next to the Secret Service agent in the front, and just the president and his wife in the back. But you'll just have to check it out.
Connolly's wife wasn't there. Is that what you're saying?
She wasn't originally. She was now, though, if you check history. So it's really interesting.
There's
that
6 in there. There's
Yeah,
6
there's
in the
actually
car on the
6.
Zapruder film, and it's
Yeah.
in color now.
Yeah. So it's something that I think would interest you, because some of the things you were mentioning that happened, like you come back and the paper's different. It seemed like the type of thing that our community finds in the Mandela Effect.
Let me just say, I have to say that it'd be really cool. That'd be right up your alley to make a documentary on the Mandela Effect, because what it is basically is there's things in our reality that have appeared to have changed for some people, big groups of people, okay? But when you research it and go look, they've always been that way. And there's thousands of things, including like art, geography, the Bible.
Yeah, scriptures have changed. Yeah.
Right. Movie lines, logos. Like, for instance, the other day it was not the other day, but I was walking into Albertsons to the grocery store and saw that the Little Caesars logo had changed to being spelled CAE instead of CEA. And I freaked out, because I knew in my reality that Caesars was spelled CEA. So do you kind of grasp what I'm saying? Or
yes. As though we've slipped into a parallel reality that has subtle change. Just like
he gets
the movie.
I knew he'd get it.
You know the movie Yesterday?
Exactly. It's just like yesterday. Yesterday, where they,
that was pretty drastic, because that they had that the Beatles had never existed.
Yeah. You know what I got to tell Paul about this? Okay, so listen to this. So, and I got to give props to Shane here, because he knows it. Okay, here's my thing though. Whenever some people believe that Michael Jackson, that there, the stuff with his library of music and all that, and he owned a lot of the Beatles catalog and all. Well, after he died, Sony got it back. Well, Sony put out that movie yesterday, and all of these Beatles songs were being used and everything. And the guy in the movie's name was Jack, and he had a mean dad, and the dad called him Jacko. Well, Michael Jackson did not like being called Jacko, and almost felt like it was kind of a,
Right, so there's this parallel with him stealing the Beatles' music and being called Jacko, like Michael Jackson stole the Beatles' music. And they really bought it legitimately. And it's like they bought it back and then put out this movie that's going to earn them all sorts of royalties on the music now that they own it again, So.
We also call that kind of thing an Easter egg.
Right.
Exactly.
You heard that expression?
Yeah.
It's where something is planted on a DVD cover or in a story or something. Something is planted that only those on the inside are at it. Yeah.
Or those very perceptive, because there's another scene where they have like a Michael Jackson hat in the background or something. There was a few things in that Yesterday movie that looked like they were sort of, just little Easter eggs, like you're saying.
Sherry, you were asking Sherry about any connection between Forrest Ackerman and Michael Jackson, and the easiest answer is that the movie Thriller.
Right, Thriller, right. You cut out a little bit, but yeah, the movie
John Landis directed and stuff. Yeah, Forrest Ackerman had as an extra, sitting in the movie theater in one of the scenes. That was That
Oh,
was
where
it.
he's eating the popcorn. I
Um,
need to go look at that. So he's like in the
that's
background
true.
while Michael Jackson's popping the popcorn. I remember that part. So we can
Yes.
find Forrest in the back as an extra.
Yes.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome.
That's awesome. We'll go look for that. Well, I really appreciate your time, Paul, for coming on here, and we'd love to have you back to discuss some more projects.
Well, it was fun. I really appreciate the opportunity to just sit down and tell it like it is and tell it like it was, and to share with people my absolute conviction that these things are true, and that when it happens to you, don't let it completely knock you off stride, but take it as a gift
Yeah.
that your reality has been in an unusual way from a realm that you cannot see.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah, and I think these things are going to increase because, like you were saying, it's considered paranormal, but I think it's actually quite normal. That's why we have paranormal frequencies, because these things are increasing in frequency. More and more people, I know in our group, are having more and more experiences, and when you can approach them without the fear and not getting freaked out, I think you could actually have a better connection and more connections. But of course, they don't want to scare you off, right?
Right. Absolutely right.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I do have Paul's
was
links
so
down in
fun.
the description below, so guys, go check out his movies. And if you're on Amazon Prime, some of the stuff's available there for free, with the Prime account already if you've got it. So thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sherry.
Yes, Paul, thank you. We're going to get you to come back and we'll go into detail maybe in each of your books and movies. Thank you
Oh, yeah, I
so
like
much.
the Roswell stuff, too, so
Yeah.
a lot to talk about. Well, thanks for your time, Paul.
Well, thank
All righty. Well, we're going to close this one out. Thank you guys for being here in the chat, and you guys watching later, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Thank you, Paul, and have a good.
If you'd like to support the work I do, go to paypal.me/UOTF. Thanks.